My name is Matthew Todd, and welcome to Inside the Scale Up. This is the podcast for founders and executives in tech looking to make an impact and learn from their peers within the tech business. We lift the lid on tech businesses, interviewing leaders and following their journey from startup to scale up and beyond, covering everything from developing product market fit, funding and fundraising models to value proposition structure and growth marketing. We learn from their journey so that you can understand how they really work, the failures, the successes, the lessons along the way, so that you can take their learnings and apply them within your own startup or scale up and join the ever-growing list of high-growth UK SaaS businesses. Hi, and welcome back to Inside the Scale Up podcast. Today, I'm here with Adrian Mitchell. Great to have you here, Adrian, this morning.
Lovely to be here.
And yeah, as always, I always like the guests to introduce themselves, introduce their own business. I like to kind of have our audience hear it as they would kind of give it in an elevator pitch. So over to you. Tell us about yourself and your business.
Brilliant. No problem at all. So I am Adrian Mitchell, and I am the co-founder and CEO of Brijj.io. So what Brijj.io is, it's a work management platform for data and analytics teams. You know, the simple way I like to let people know about it is that it's effectively just like Jira is for software developers, Brijj is for data and analytics teams. So the problem we're trying to solve is that in the UK alone, £24 billion is spent on data projects. And you may have seen this statistic bandied around, it's all over LinkedIn. 80% of data projects actually fail. And that's a staggering level of failure, and a staggering level of potential waste. Now, why do these projects fail? We believe, and our research shows, that the primary reason these projects fail is because the way that data creators, so data analysts, BI developers, data scientists work, is not efficient when working with business users, so your marketing managers, your sales directors. And value in data analytics projects completely depends on that connection between data creators and data users. You know, a simple chart has no intrinsic value. It only has value when it's used by a business person to make a decision, create an action, or create an outcome. Now, our platform makes sure that every step of a data project works for both data creators and data consumers, and makes sure that they are connected and operate and work effectively together. That's effectively my business. Yeah.
I see. Fantastic. And I think, I'd love to learn more about what that looks like in practice, some of the benefits that it can bring. But before we kind of get into that, I always like to start and figure out kind of, what led you to kind of co-founding this business in the first place. What was your background? Where were you coming from? And what led to the idea and then the decision to actually try and take this forward?
Yeah, no problem. So I actually, funnily enough, fell into data analytics. I did criminal justice and sociology at university. And obviously, when you do sociology, there's an aspect of research in there. There's an aspect of data analysis, and I always found that quite interesting. My early career, I was actually in recruitment, so I was recruiting students, actually international students, into universities, and just by sheer luck and just coincidence, I was working for a business called Hobson's, which is part of the Daily Mail General Trust, and they needed a data analyst, and they asked around the office, does anybody know how to use Excel? To Microsoft Excel, and I put my hand up, and then from there, fell in love with it and worked my way up to becoming head of research and reporting in that business, and then obviously worked for a number of different corporations like Allied Irish Banks in Ireland, First Trust Bank in Northern Ireland. I've worked for Capita in the UK, which was an experience. I've worked for United Students, and I've worked in every single area of data analytics. So I've been a BI developer, I've been a data manager, been responsible for data governance. I've, as I mentioned, been a head of research and reporting. I've been a analytics development manager. So I've seen it all. I've effectively done it all over the 15, 16 years I've been in the business. And so what that's done for me is it's helped me understand and experience firsthand how difficult it is, firstly, to do the job, and secondly, to add value to a given business. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I or one of my team members has created what we would class as, a beautiful piece of analysis, a really intelligent model, let's say, a really effective piece of code, as an example, and worked, for want of a better phrase, our butts off on this, only to find out that the business hadn't used it, didn't understand it, or simply shrugs their shoulders and says, so what? Yeah. Now, this happens, this has happened and does happen in every business I've been in. I've got a lot of contacts and a lot of friends in this industry, and they have the exact same frustrations. So I know that this is a huge, personal problem for data analysts and analytics professionals, which leads into that level of failure across, different businesses.
Yeah, I see. And what are some of the reasons that, those other stakeholders in the business don't manage to extract value, or, as you say, just shrug their shoulders and say, so what?
Yeah, so it fundamentally comes down to the way that a project is started and the way that a project is managed. So too often a business user will ask for a specific output. Yeah. So they'll say, I need a chart showing sales by region over the last 4 years. Let's keep it simple like that. Obviously, usually it's much more complicated than that, but let's keep it simple. The problem with that is often the data or information they ask for is not actually the best piece of data or the right question to actually create an outcome. Yeah. So what tends to happen is data teams often are quite transactional. They're like they work like a service desk, right? A request comes in, they get a question for A, they answer A, they deliver, and then they move on. Yeah. Right. When the truth is, you shouldn't even really be asking a business user what the question is. You should be asking them what is the outcome they want to achieve. What's the business decision or the thing they need to do at the end of this project. Okay, because data users, people in the business, often have absolutely no idea the sheer breadth of data that a business itself holds. Yeah. You may have experienced in your past, or they either don't understand what data the business holds. They often ask for data that the business doesn't have. Right? Yeah. That's what generally happens, and then they look at you and well, I need that data, so get me that specific data. The reality is, if you find out what a person needs, what the business outcome is, and you work well with business users, your chances of success at actually creating a piece of analysis which has intrinsic and tangible value for that business user massively skyrockets. And so that there sounds incredibly simple, but trust me on this, so many businesses fail at doing that very simple thing. And we've created a methodology and a platform and a piece of software that makes that incredibly easy to do and makes it basically part of the process. You may have heard of opinionated software before. Have you ever heard of that? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So just for listeners, opinionated software is software that actually has some rigidity built in. You know how software often wants to create a lot, you can create your own workflows, you can create your own way of working. Opinionated software actually does the opposite. It has a lot of flexibility, but it has some opinionated workflows which you cannot deviate from. That's exactly what we've done with Brijj, because we know that asking questions in the right way, delivering the project in a structured way, eliminates those mistakes that are so often made. So I hope to answer the question. I hope. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense about the problems that those businesses see and the reasons that they're not able to extract the value that they're looking for, because they, as you say, they lack the knowledge, the experience to approach that in the right way, to have the right processes, methodology, and thought process behind it. So obviously then your background enabled you to see that from every angle, really appreciate that problem personally. How did you then decide that this was a problem worth solving with your own platform? What was it that kind of led you to trying to start that as a business with confidence? Yeah, so for me, I think my background actually helped me with this, because as I mentioned, I've been heavily involved in research. Obviously, my whole career is based around data. So I was never going to start something without making sure, right? I was going to collect the data to make sure that my assumptions and my experiences tallied with the wider reality. I mean, don't get me wrong, I had an awful lot of anecdotal evidence that this problem existed.
Yeah.
But I'm just effectively one data point, and my contemporaries and my colleagues and people I know in the industry are a few other data points. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to bring in more data.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring in a lot more data. So the first thing that we did to validate whether or not this problem existed was we ran a piece of research with 700 what we termed white collar workers, so office-based workers. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we got 700 individuals, and we didn't actually decide to split that 700 between data creators and data consumers. What we did was we randomized 700 individuals because we wanted to find out what proportion of people in industry class themselves as data creators and data users. That was the first thing we needed to do.
Okay.
Yeah. Because again, we had an assumption that there was a certain number of analysts in a given business.
Yeah.
But we needed to find out what the truth actually was. So that was the first thing we did.
I
But we
see.
started asking these individuals, a set of questions that were not specifically, that we absolutely needed to make sure we didn't lead them down a path that we wanted. We wanted to take bias out of our assumptions. So we asked them simple things such as, firstly, like I said, are you a data creator or a data consumer? Do you class yourself as such? Secondly, if you are a data consumer, what systems do your data creators in your business use to manage their projects?
Yeah.
How often do you feel that your business gives you the data that you need? When it doesn't, why doesn't it? All these different questions around their experience. And then with data creators, we asked them, what systems do you use? What problems do you have? Do you have any problems? How successful are your projects? How often are they successful? How often are your projects actually used and utilized by the business? So this gave us an understanding of whether or not our assumptions were correct about the industry as a whole.
I see.
Yep.
And where did you source those kind of 700, people from? Was that, personal network?
Yeah. So at first we thought we could get that sort of end number just through, distributing it to people we knew, and using LinkedIn as a social platform to try and to get those submissions. Now, and that wasn't successful in terms of getting the sheer number that we needed. And during the process, we realised that actually we were instilling some level of bias into our sample anyway, because these were people that were either directly connected with us or second connections, so to speak, to use LinkedIn terminology, which means, therefore, that we're going to put the group of individuals that have given our assumptions into that data set.
I see.
So it was a mistake. So we shouldn't have done that. So what we did was we went out to an external source and let them know the makeup of the group that we wanted, told them we needed to be randomized, and then they went out and sourced these individuals. So we didn't know any of these people personally.
I see.
Which I think was in hindsight the obvious and smarter choice to validate in the first instance.
Yeah, I think that's a good point about bias, and I think a lot of startups and even at the scale-up stage, we always instill the importance of doing that kind of research on an ongoing basis. But I think you can assume that LinkedIn might seem like an easy platform to get in front of a number of people. And, it certainly is a platform we recommend people do utilize. But I think you've got to consider what you're trying to get out of it and understand that, your connection pool and second degree extended network is going to be made up of a particular audience, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. They're going to reflect you and your opinions to some degree. And that's, just not forgetting my particular startup, but in startups and scale-ups in general, that's a really big mistake. I can't remember the name of the book, but I think it's with the mum test, right? Where you do not ask somebody about your business. Yeah. Because they will not and cannot give you a unbiased opinion. So I feel like that's what we were initially going to inadvertently do. Yeah. And I'm glad that we ended up not doing that. And again, that's a stroke of luck, because as I said, we just weren't getting the results we needed, so we had to look for a different method. Yeah. But that wasn't where we stopped with the research though. We did that research because we wanted to see whether some of our underlying assumptions about the wider market were true. Yeah. And But then what we needed to do really is we needed to talk to our potential buyers, our actual customers, to see whether or not what we plan to build would have actual value to them.
Yeah.
So what we did in that instance was we sourced, I think it's 22 analytics leaders, so to speak, CIOs, analytics managers, director of analytics, director of BI, that sort of level across the English-speaking world. So we had a few from Australia, we had some Canada, the United States, and obviously the UK and Ireland. And what we did with them was we asked them some similar questions to this group of 700, but this was more around, what larger strategic problems they had when they have failing data projects, what effect that has on their team's morale, what platforms they use, what platforms do their teams feel are useful / not useful.
Yeah.
And then what we did was we mocked up effectively what was a 1 minute explainer video, really.
Okay.
That we it was completely and utterly made up, but it had what we perceived to be some of the potential features and attributes of our application, and some of the benefits, more to the point, that it was going to solve. And so after we asked these people all of these questions about their experiences, we then so they were doing this online. Obviously, they clicked a button, and then explain the video came up, and it was like, and we said to them, what do you think this product does? We simply asked them that, what do you think it does? Because we didn't want to tell them what it does. We wanted to see whether or not the way that we were articulating what it does made sense to them.
Yeah, that's interesting. Are you getting across what you intended to get across? But I suppose also, they'll come with their own set of problems and challenges. So I guess you probably start to see a little bit of what are their perceptions and how that might be, useful and extended to their particular situation.
Exactly. We did that. That's precisely it. We did that because we wanted to firstly get the problems or absence of problems. Actually, some of these respondents, I haven't got any problems.
Yeah.
So get that into the forefront of their mind, show them something, and see how they've interpreted what we're showing based on what they've just literally been considering.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? And they had very different views of it. Some of them saw it as a pure project management platform. Some of them saw it as a collaboration platform. Some of them, as I mentioned, saw no need for it.
Yeah.
And articulated why they thought this was a ridiculous idea, so to speak. And it was incredibly useful piece of qualitative, information for us from leaders and people who held budget, people who make these decisions for their businesses. And before we did that piece of research, we decided that if we had a certain response rate of negatives, as in no interest in the platform, don't see how it solves any problems, wouldn't theoretically buy it, we were going to cancel the whole project. We were just not going to go forward.
Yeah.
I can't remember the precise figure, but we decided that if a third of the people said they did not find it interesting, then we would cancel. That's less than half, obviously. But the reason for that is because in our previous research and just in our talking to other entrepreneurs, talking to other business owners, there is a big difference between somebody saying I would buy something and somebody actually paying for it.
Yeah, and was that the question you asked? Would you buy this?
We said yes. So effectively, if this platform delivered what you believe it to deliver, would you purchase a platform like this for your current business?
I see.
That's what we asked.
Yeah.
And so by asking that for your current business, it gave us an understanding of, firstly, would they buy, and secondly, is there a need in current businesses for this problem? Because again, if you ask somebody, would you buy this? Conceptually, yeah, I would buy it if I needed it.
Indeed. That's very different to current situation relevance, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. So we needed to find out, would you buy it? And do you theoretically need it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's again, there's always some ambiguity. There's always some risk in these pieces of research because, again, you don't have a product, because they're not having to sign a check. And you cannot, it's very difficult to eliminate that at such an early stage before before you really start.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. And, talking to, we're part of incubators, we're part of some accelerators, and talking to other business leaders and talking to the people who run these incubators, we did a higher level of research than most other businesses do. But again, like I say, my background meant that just was an impossibility for me. I wouldn't have been able to do it without doing it. I'd have been too scared. I don't know. I'd have been too nervous to go ahead. But I'm glad I did. And the vast majority of our experiences so far have tallied with that research, which has obviously been really, really encouraging.
Yeah, and in that piece of research, were there, surprises? Were there things that you weren't expecting that, their perception of the products, where that differed to your assumptions?
Yeah, so, I mean, the biggest surprise for me was in the first piece of research with the 700 individuals, because if you split the two respondents between data creators and data users, the number of data creators who said they had a process and a platform in place to manage their projects was close to, say, 80%.
Yeah.
They said, we have something, that could be Google Forms, it could be something really basic like an Excel sheet, but they said they had something. Then when you asked data users, it was something like 10% said there was a process.
Oh, wow.
So what we saw there was, okay, so it seems like lots of businesses have something, but from the customer's perspective, they don't.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a huge problem there on the customer side, actually, not on the data creators. So that gave us some really insightful stuff. But with the piece with the the data leaders, the 20 odd people, the bit that surprised me the most about that was actually the ease at which they understood what it was we were trying to do, and how many of them said, we don't have something like this.
Okay.
So the reason why that surprised me was because, again, I think that the research showed and indicated to me that people on the ground, data creators, the people doing the coding, the people doing the actual work, they do have processes in place.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, the people higher up, the leaders, the people at a strategic level are not aware of these processes, which means to me, right, that these processes, as they are currently set up, are not solving strategic level problems. Because if they were solving strategic level problems, those people at the strategic level would be aware of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that gave me another piece of confidence and real insight that the platforms that are currently being used are seen as tactical. They're seen as process. They're not seen as solving the strategic problem. And the strategic problem, as we define it, is that relationship between data creators and data users, because without it, you cannot deliver value.
Yeah. And why do you think
that was a big surprise?
And why do you think that is? Do you think that's because it's a relatively new field? Are there existing products on the market that address that, but they're not just aware of them? What does that kind of landscape look like?
I think it's because the vast majority of analytical professionals, unfortunately, are quite tactical in their outlook. They're quite process driven.
Yeah.
So let me give you an example. Let's talk about Jira. So Atlassian Jira, which is probably the most, certainly in the past and up to this point, the most popular project management tool for definitely software developers, and for the vast majority of analytics staff. Right. So they know of Jira. They know it does a job. So therefore, the default position is, okay, if we're going to spend any money on this, Jira's the choice.
Yeah.
Yeah. The problem with Jira is, like I say, it's a very process orientated piece of software, which predominantly provides huge amounts of value for the actual creators, the software developers themselves. Yeah. It doesn't focus and consider the fact that the connection between technical and non-technical users is absolutely imperative in the data analytics space.
Okay.
So because data people often have software type backgrounds, because they're often mathematically minded, they default to Jira. They don't even consider the strategic level consideration.
I see.
They don't consider the fact that their data users are never, ever going to go into Jira once they look at it.
Yeah.
Like, I can't tell you how many times I have tried to implement Jira or a Jira-like piece of software into a business. Tried to get, let's say, a sales director to update a ticket or to submit a ticket or to respond to a comment. They've opened it, seen all the options, and gone, I ain't using this. I'm emailing you. I'm phoning you. And what that does is effectively means that you have a system in place that you want to use to better manage your projects, but half of the individuals who need to be an intricate part of that project refuse to use it. So therefore, it loses a huge amount of its value. That's the key problem that I find in this industry. The analytics people love Jira because it does a real job for them. It does an incredible job for them, but it does a terrible job for their customers. And without that connection between them and their customers, they have such a higher chance of project failure and a lower chance of project success.
I think that's really interesting. So you've got a market where the tooling decisions are being driven by like half of the users, as you say, and they're not the strategic ones. They're more tactical, and I guess from your business perspective, they're also not the people with the purchasing power directly themselves as well.
Often, yeah, that's the real key. So the people who are going to be using our software are not the ones buying.
Yeah.
That is actually one of the really interesting aspects of our business, but also one of the huge challenges of our business. Because what you tend to have almost an adversarial relationship between the user and the person buying. So, for instance, if we talk to a director of BI, or we talk to actually one of the leaders on the consumer side, so they're not the technical teams, they're not the creators, they get what we're trying to build, and they get what we're trying to create, and they're like, this, we need this. And then you get to, so let's say, the head of BI or the lead BI developer, and he's like, I want to use Jira.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying? So it's a very tricky / important conversation to be having early with both of those individuals, the strategic minded person and the tactical person, so that they both understand why we're doing this. And the way that we tackle that is that we actually talk in practical terms to the strategic person. We talk to the tactical person in emotional terms. And what I mean by this is, we talk to the BI developer, let's say, and we say, how many times do you do a piece of work or create a BI dashboard or have to spend hours updating the data set only to find out no one's logged in for 3 months?
Yeah.
And they say it happens all the time. It makes me so angry. And I say, but do you know why that's happening? Because it's certainly not happening because you're bad at your job, is it? I mean, you're fantastic at your job. You're doing wonderful work. You're working so hard. You're delivering exactly to spec as it's been defined to you.
Yeah.
So because we know you're great, there must be a problem somewhere else, right? It must actually be with the spec in the first place. It must be that you're answering the wrong questions. That's how we talk to them and try and turn their viewpoint around from using one of those, Azure DevOps or Jira, one of those big players. So it's a real challenge, and it's actually been one of the biggest challenges we have. But it's also completely understandable and something that we're still working on, but luckily doing quite well in turning that around.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting, and especially when selling B2B, you've got to bear in mind the different stakeholders within those businesses that are going to have an opinion. And I think you're absolutely right. You do have to treat them differently and speak to them differently, because their perceptions about the challenges within the business and their role will be very different.
Absolutely. I mean, everyone in a business has their own different motivations, right? Often those tactical level people, the BI developers, are just trying to do a good job, and they're trying to go home.
Yeah.
And whereas the strategic level people are, they're thinking, again, because they're strategic, they're thinking of the next step, they're thinking of the future. And there's nothing wrong with either of those two views. Everyone has their role in the business, but like you say, you have to articulate things in multiple different ways, and you have to try and plan for those eventualities. And it's incredibly difficult to plan for those before you've started speaking to people, because you have assumptions. You have so many assumptions, and you realize that it's actually incredibly humbling starting a business, because you think you're an expert, and then you find out you're not.
Yeah.
And you find out that actually what I believe to be totally true and what everyone I know tells me is true, actually it's a 1% of an incredibly diverse and massive market. And you just have to be learning all the time, and you have to be humble enough to just completely, in some cases, forget what you know and do what people are actually saying to you.
Yeah.
Actually listen and actually do what they say, which is just hard when you've been in the business for 16 years and you think you know it all, like I did.
Yeah, no, I can imagine that. Yeah, you come to that situation with a lot of kind of strongly held assumptions and beliefs. But I think the good thing about the approach that you've described is, and because of your background, is that you are willing to put that effort, and actually not even willing, you kind of saw it as a necessity to put in that effort in terms of research.
Had to. I mean, imagine if I'd have not done that and got overexcited with my idea, and then found out later I was completely and utterly wrong. I'd have been banging my head against a wall. So I just couldn't do that. So that would be my biggest recommendation actually at this stage. Remember, you've got to bear in mind I'm still a startup, right? So I haven't, so to speak, made it. Yeah. I'm not. I can't speak from that position. What I can speak from is a position of being in the storm, so to speak. I'm in that difficult stage. I'm working, 70-hour weeks, and that would have been significantly harder and significantly more stressful than it is if I didn't have that research to back it up.
Yeah,
that research often comforts me because there's many. I've experienced it, and everyone I speak to in my incubator experiences where you start sweating and you're thinking, have I made a terrible mistake here? This is incredibly difficult to do. And you need anything you can find to get you back on that path and to keep you motivated and keep you solely focused on your vision and your mission. And for me, that research was that piece. So, that would be a massive piece of massive recommendation of mine for anybody who's looking to get into this.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great recommendation, one that I would echo. And I think, as you say, finding that from, the right kind of scale and type of research versus just asking a couple of close connections until you get one of them to say, oh, that sounds nice.
Yes.
There's a lot different in terms of quality of research, isn't it?
Yeah. It's almost like you kind of want to avoid people who are going to be nice to you when it comes to finding out about your business, I think. And I'm maybe articulating that incorrectly, but it's a real mistake to talk to people like you or who like you when you're starting a business, because they will tell you they're being honest and truthful. And sometimes they are, and sometimes they're actually spot on. I'm sure startup and many massive successful businesses were like, that sounds like a fantastic idea. For instance, Facebook, I'd argue, people went incredible and they were correct. But you can never know. So ask the people who have no vested interest in you.
Yeah.
Who look at it completely from a selfish perspective, because every single one of your potential customers is going to do that when it comes to the day of selling this thing. And ask them. Yeah, so that's why I'm really glad about that research. Yeah, it's probably one of, if let's say 5-10 years down the line I'm starting a new business and I'm doing a new venture or something, that's the one thing I will always do is research to a huge extent.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. So then with that second piece of research done, you kind of got that confidence that you roughly know that it's worth building something and what that should look like. How did you then kind of manage that initial build and then acquisition of those early customers?
So the next stage after we finished the research and we called it our go decision, we said we're going to go for this. We're going to do this. Effectively involved, understanding exactly how we were going to develop a piece of software that we wanted to build. Now, as I mentioned, I've got a huge background on the technical side in data analytics, but I'm not a software developer. I don't have the ability to build a SaaS app, so to speak. So we knew from the very beginning, and again, this is part of the equation in our mind of whether or not this is worth it, that we were going to have to source an agency at the very least, or try and bring on some kind of technical talent super early.
Yeah.
Now, luckily for me, and this is something that other people, that some of your listeners may not be lucky enough, is that my co-founder is independently wealthy. Okay. So I didn't have to consider, like other people do, funding rounds in the early stages. Obviously, I had to convince him about the business and had to pitch to that one individual, but I didn't have that as a consideration. But what it also meant is that I knew I had a certain amount of money from the very beginning, so we could afford an agency, as an example.
Yeah.
So we decided to go down the agency route because we did not want to have to deal with things like bringing on a CTO as a co-founder, negotiating on their share of the business, having to deal with them on a personal basis, managing their expectations, all that sort of stuff. We didn't want to be distracted by that, so we went for an agency, and so we knew we were going to do that. So what we did was we I think it was 15 different agencies we reached out to.
Wow.
And before we'd done that, again, this is based on my background, I'd already created an entire spec platform on Confluence, Jira Confluence.
Yeah.
So I'd written out everything that we wanted to potentially achieve, and I'd split that out between, must-haves, should-haves, could-haves, nice-to-haves, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so effectively what this was a gigantic repository of what we want to build, including logic diagrams, all sorts of stuff like that. Now, obviously, when you're building a product, you want to go down the MVP route, don't you? You want to build the minimum thing, the smallest product you can, because it saves money, saves time, helps you validate. That's the lean, the lean methodology, so to speak. But the reason why we wanted to put everything on there is firstly because it was useful to scope out what our grand vision.
Yeah.
But secondly, it helped us understand which agencies would read it and which of them were strategic and business minded in their focus. Yeah. Some of them would just say, "Yep, we can deliver that. Here's a costing for the entire thing. There you go."
Yeah.
Didn't even consider the idea of an MVP. Didn't consider the idea of doing this in a modular, agile method. They just were simply out for our cash.
Yeah.
And so that helped us validate them. Then some of them were the polar opposite, and they said, "Listen, we don't think that you should be doing everything here. I think you need to prioritize. That's useful, helped us have discussions." But then some of them told us, "We understand your business vision. We believe this is the first bit you should develop. Do this in the first month, do this in the next 3 months, and then work from there." Those were the ones that we moved to the next conversations. Does that make sense? So we almost wanted to create a test for the agencies, because they're businesses. They want to maximize their revenues. We understand that. There's nothing wrong with that. But we need a way of validating whether or not that agency is firstly going to be able to do the job, and secondly, whether they've got the right mindset.
Yeah, are they capable, and are they just transactional in nature, or are they actually going to help support you with that vision and see the bigger picture and value of a longer term relationship?
Exactly. Precisely. And that was essential for us, right? Because I was going to operate as somewhat of a project and product manager during this build. And so I needed to be sure that when I say something, they're going to be able to interpret that, not just as a technical specification, but correlate it with my business need.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So, I'm talking about how data creators and data consumers need to work together. In this relationship, I'm like a consumer. And if I ask them to do something like build this module for me, and they just build it without considering its actual practical application to my business problem, I am going to build things that make no sense. I'm going to make mistakes. So I need those technical individuals to have a business mind so that they can effectively work like a CTO within my business and deliver for me. And so ultimately, it took us 2.5 months to choose our agency. That's a long time in the startup world, but there's some decisions that you absolutely must do everything to get right. They always say hire slow, fire fast, right? People say that. So we hired slow because we wanted to try and get it right. And so after loads of conversations, loads of back and forth, loads of negotiations on costs, that's how we chose our agency. That's how we developed the product and got the technical expertise in to develop that product. So that's the journey that we took on the technical build side.
Yeah, and I think that's a good approach to take on. Like, you're kind of thinking behind, giving those agencies a test and evaluating them, as to how they're actually going to work and support your business, because as you say, many of them will just either not be capable or say they are when they're not, or just be interested in that cash. And I think, once you get to wanting to build something, I've seen it quite a lot that, founders will be so keen to start something, they, say yes to the first thing they think they can afford, but they won't really appreciate the cost of that taking longer than it should, or the wrong thing being built and then having to do a lot of rework on that. So I think, it's important to take the right strategic approach to selecting those partners, that you're going to work with in your business.
Absolutely. I think a lot of founders are optimistic by nature, right? You know, we visualize a future where things are better, right? And you've got to be optimistic to do that. But that optimism can sometimes cause you to make mistakes, like you've just said there, right? So you find the first one you can afford, and you're optimistic about it.
Yeah.
They could do it, and then you quickly make a decision because you know speed is of the essence. You need time. You don't have time. You don't have money. Let's get this going. There's some things which, if you get it wrong, are just going to destroy you. And in the SaaS space and in the software space, often it can be the people who build your product. Because there's one thing I can guarantee you, right, is they will make mistakes.
Yeah.
You will build bad features. You will they will not deliver it on time and on budget. Like,
yeah,
I've experienced that as you know, a data creator. I will almost always either be rushing towards the end or deliver it a little bit late, because these things, there's mistakes. You've probably heard it. You know, what is it? Even in like project management in general, what is it, like 85% of projects underestimate the time it's going to take?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so something like that, right? So in software, it's exactly the same. So you want to be optimistic, but you've also got to be kind of pessimistic, right? You've got to be, I got to call it a realist rather than a pessimist.
Yeah.
These things are going to be delayed. These things, and you've got to make the right choice. And so again, I would spend time on choosing your agency or choosing your CTO. You know, no one would argue that you need to choose the right CTO if that's the route you go down. No one would argue we need to hire and really be careful about the best developers we can hire.
Yeah.
So if you're going to do that, make sure you do the same thing for an agency.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly the same problem.
Yeah, and I think just because you reach a particular stage in that business, you know, no matter what that is, I think a lot of founders then have this sense of urgency, and they worry, oh, I've got to this stage now, therefore there must be other people almost ready to overtake me, therefore I need to get this out as quickly as possible. When that isn't true, and you shouldn't be scared of sharing your idea. No one is going to take that and run with it and execute the way that you do, and it's that execution that is the important thing.
Yeah, execution is everything. Everyone's got ideas. Execution is where it's at. And obviously, like I said earlier, I'm not at the stage where I can sit here and profess to you that I'm some sort of execution genius. I'm executing right now. But what I can say to you is it's incredibly tough, and it's way tougher to do this than it was to, for instance, write that entire spec document in Confluence. It was way tougher to do this than it was to convince my co-founder to part with his money to try and help deliver this vision of mine.
Yeah.
It can't be understated how difficult it is to execute, but I can also say it can't be understated how good it feels when things go right. When you get those wins. So yeah, I certainly wouldn't want to put anybody off because it's absolutely amazing to be doing this. Even though, like I say, I haven't made it, but I'm on the way.
No, it certainly sounds like you've made a lot of very smart decisions along the way and are heading in the right direction, which is backed up by the results that you're seeing. So
exactly, yeah. So you asked earlier about the results and
yeah,
how we went about trying to acquire customers. This here, in my opinion, is actually one of the major mistakes we made.
Okay.
So one of the major, like you just mentioned, we made some good decisions. This is one of the bad decisions that we made. So we had the view that because we were going into a space that had quite a few perceptual competitors. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. So we don't believe we have any actual competitors because we are a dedicated data analytics, project management collaboration tool.
Yeah.
Right. But from the perception of our customers, many of them see us as the same as Jira.
Okay.
Right. As the same as Monday.com. So perceptually, we're going into a space where there's lots of competitors, right? And once we can start talking to people, we can explain the differences. But they're not going to put the effort in to see the differences when they see an advertisement of ours or see a social post. They're just going to make assumptions, right? So because we were perceptually in a very competitive landscape, we thought that we needed a really incredibly polished product before we even told anyone we existed.
Okay.
Right? Before we ever did any significant work about marketing our business aggressively.
Yeah.
And that was a mistake. Because what it meant was is that while I say we had funding, no one's got unlimited funds. And so we spent more money in the early days on the product when we should have, routed some of that money to early stage marketing, testing, commercial testing, and commercial activities. So that was one of the mistakes we made, right? So our initial, in the early stages, I would say that 90% of my time, in the first phase of this business, was spent on product development, and 10% was on marketing / commercial activities, right? And so because 10% of my time was dedicated on this, all we were doing were Google ad, Reddit ad, LinkedIn ad experiments.
Okay.
Yeah. So spending very, very little money on these platforms, but trying to work out what the best keywords were, what the best channels, what the best, customer profiles were, all of that sort of stuff. Just trying to collect data to be ready for the time that we flip the switch.
Okay.
Now, during that period, we still managed to get 70 early adopters onto the platform, which is a really good number. It's nothing to turn your nose up at. But I believe that if we'd have flipped the amount of money slightly from product into marketing, we could have significantly increased that number. Right now, that would have had huge benefits for us, right? Because we'd have had more data coming in about what the product should be as we developed it.
Yes. Yeah.
Does that make sense? So, don't get me wrong, we have that input, but more data is always better in this sort of space. And so, I think we'd have firstly had more information on what value the actual product itself, as we were building it, could provide, what features we should be building out. We'd have been able to understand our customers significantly better than we otherwise would have done at the point that we started our commercial activities, and we'd have been in a better space. And so what that's meant, and why that's a mistake, is because we've only just really in the last few months started our commercial activities, right? So we spent 6 months trying to hire individuals into the business.
Yeah.
We've set up our strategy in terms of marketing, but we need more information than we currently have. Yeah, and so we don't believe that we're taking advantage of what we have to the greatest extent that we otherwise could have done, and that's a real shame, because we're not adding customers at the speed at which we'd ideally particularly want to be if we'd have flipped that spend. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, that makes sense.
We've modelled how much faster we'd be growing. We are growing fast, but we'd have been growing much, much faster, I think, if we'd have flipped it. And that's effectively what I think could have happened. But it's hindsight, right? You make decisions at the time, and that's one of those things. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, and I think a lot of people, see marketing, unfortunately, still in a very transactional way. It's part of a marketing funnel to feed people at the top, to kind of get them into a sales process, to convert them further down. But, so many companies of all sizes really miss out on the fact that those marketing activities are part of that research, and it helps you to polish the messaging around your product, which, feeds back into marketing itself, but it also feeds into sales, and it also feeds into development, because you develop your kind of strong opinion and message that you want to take to that market, and then you understand their wants, desires, their values at a deeper level, which then does feed into the development of the product as well, so that it can, almost kind of preempt a lot of their, problems, challenges, and it helps you to position it in a very particular way, doesn't it?
It does. And I don't think, again, because this is my first startup, I don't think I was aware, and maybe other founders may have experienced the same thing, of how much time marketing takes.
Yeah.
Brand awareness, trust, social proof is so much time. So you should be starting day one. You should be starting day one on developing those plans, on bringing in talent and help in the marketing and commercial space. I mentioned earlier, we decided not to bring in on a CTO because we didn't believe that we needed to do that.
Yeah.
Again, in hindsight, what I would have 100% done is bring on a commercially minded, marketing-based / sales-based founder day one.
Okay.
That's something that I will or would do if I could do that all again.
Yeah.
Because again, you also sometimes, I think, and I've seen this with other people I speak to, because again, you're a founder, you're quite ambitious. While not every founder is confident, so to speak, or is an extrovert, you have a certain level of belief, right? You have a certain type of belief in yourself and your idea. So what you do is you convince yourself, I'll be able to sell this, no problem.
Yeah.
Because I believe in it, right? But the skill set for a marketing and sales person is incredibly difficult to find and incredibly difficult to do and massively valuable. I used to ask myself, why do the sales guys earn the most money? Because like when I used to work for Capita, for instance, I used to think, why do these guys get so much money? Like they're not that special, but they are, because it's one of the toughest jobs there is in business. And so that's what I would have done. I'd have brought in somebody much more early. I'd have spent much more money on it in the early stages of this business. But like I said, hindsight's a wonderful thing. You make a decision at the moment you make it based on the best available information. And so you can't beat yourself up when you make those mistakes, because as long as you made the right decision at the time, that's just the way it is. That's the way it is sometimes. And then hindsight sometimes finds that you didn't have all the information, but you would never know that.
Absolutely. I think the key thing is to actually make a decision actively and strategically based on that information that you do have, rather than just kind of sit on that, not make a decision either way, or hedge your bets, do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and that can really harm a business, more than making the wrong decision.
Well, exactly. I mean, we experienced that with our experiments, right? Like in effect, we were doing experimentation for the right reason.
Yeah.
But actually, what that meant was some of our experiments were probably wasting money, because we weren't experts in that space. We thought we're collecting data, so that we're ready for when it matters. When if we'd have brought in the right talent, they'd have quickly identified, right, that's a dead herring. That's a dead end.
Yeah.
Let's eliminate that experiment and let's try a new experiment. Let's try this new route. But as I say, commercial talent is very hard to acquire, and at the time, because of the perceptually competitive landscape that we were dealing with, or we believed we were dealing with, that's the decision we made. But there you go. That's what being a startup or a scale up is all about, right?
No, absolutely. It's always a learning process. There'll always be something to learn, and that may be a skill or a capability that you don't have, and obviously you can look at outsourcing that and getting support with some of those areas as well. But there will be there's always going to be new things that you're going to learn from your markets as that landscape changes as well. And that's why that research process, I think, is inherent part of what good marketing looks like. It should be heavily research based, but I think it should be a continual process as well, because new tooling will arrive, new best practices, and even as people more people use your platform, you will kind of help them level up what they are now capable of doing. So there'll be things that they need that cannot be thought of at the moment because it wouldn't make sense.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean that point there about them identifying things that they need that you would have no idea, that happens, that has happened, and it happens very, very quickly. And then you have to make, again, strategic and tactical decisions about how your roadmap's going to completely flip.
Yeah.
But again, you've also got to be careful about that, because you can hear some ideas or some things that are absolutely essential, but you need to validate whether or not that's essential to a lot of people. Yeah. Because there's no point in developing that feature if it's just one person saying, I absolutely need this. Everyone needs this. Why is this not here? It's crazy. Why, put this feature in. So everything takes time. And so that's why you need to be very methodical and think very carefully about how you play this out, especially when you're a small business like ours, right? Like there's only a few of us. Yeah. And we've only got, meant to have 8 hours in a day, but most of the time we have 12. Yeah. But that's the way it is, and that's why it makes it so challenging. But that's also why it makes those wins rewarding, and hopefully, obviously, when we IPO or exit, super rewarding.
Yes, yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, that's in the future though.
Yeah. And yeah, I want to kind of, jump into kind of what, the next steps and the vision for Brijj looks like in a sec. But before we do, one thing, we discussed, before this interview that I'd just love you to kind of explain is that, we were talking about the reason people make decisions that aren't based on data. And you said that a lot of people, make assumptions based on opinions that they treat as fact. So I'd love to kind of hear your perspective on that and the use of data, especially as we've talked so much about the value of research.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's a controversial thing to say that a lot of people make decisions based on erroneous information, right? We see it all of the time.
Yeah.
Right. But you've got to see that from a human perspective. And the reason I talk about this is because I often used to explain this to my analysts when I was managing different businesses. People make decisions, as I mentioned earlier, on all available data, right? All available data as a concept. Yeah. Now, unfortunately for us, humans are hardwired to believe that their personal experience and what they see with their own eyes is more valuable as data than anything else.
Yeah.
Right. So, people always say, "Oh, making decisions on assumptions is wrong," but unfortunately, making decisions on assumptions is our natural way of making decisions, because for hundreds of thousands of years of our history, we had to make quick decisions. Right. You're walking through the woods and a piece of wood cracks. You've got to run.
Yeah.
Right? Like you got to make quick decisions based on what you hear and feel around you. So we're hardwired to do that. But obviously, that has huge repercussions in business today because what the sheer amount of data points, of information that you have no chance of experiencing personally. When I say personally, I mean you as an individual, but also your business or your department or your team, is so vast. And if you make decisions based on your personal experience, again, your team's personal experience, your business personal experience, you are missing 99% of the true reality of your market, of your space that you're working in. So, being in data and research has taught me, right, that you need to firstly collect every bit of data that you know about, every piece of information within your business or within your sphere.
Yeah.
But you also need to spend some time thinking about the possible data that you have no idea even exists, right? That you have no idea exists. I'll give you an example, right? So I used to work for a business called Unite Students. Okay. And I used to be BI manager there. And so they have a responsibility to look after their students, for instance, as an example, right? Students live in their buildings. They are contractually and morally obligated to make sure these people are safe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they do an incredible amount of work trying to make sure that the well-being of their students is looked after. They have huge amounts of data that they collect, which their students know about, but about who they are, situations they're in, their a little bit about their history, in order to make sure that they keep them safe and keep them well. And it would be very, very easy just to collect that data and keep that data as is and just work down that process. But we discovered that there were ways to use other completely unrelated data sets, to ascertain whether or not a given student or a given group of students is at risk. I'll give you an example. So in Unite buildings, there are sound sensors, which are there to make sure that a particular corridor may be loud or maybe causing a sound disturbance, right?
Okay.
So it doesn't record any words. It doesn't record any. It just records a sound level.
Yeah,
that's what it does. It's like 10 decibels right now. It's at whatever. So it's not really. It's not very interesting data. But we thought to ourselves, okay, what if we find that a particular corridor, a particular room is noisy, but what about the opposite? What if it's super quiet all of the time? What if nothing's happening in that particular corridor? And what this data gives you is, it doesn't give you a hard and fast bit of knowledge. It doesn't tell you anything for certain, but it gives you an indication of whether a given corridor or group of rooms are getting along, if they're establishing relationships.
Yeah. Interesting.
And you now know to a certain level whether or not students in that particular corridor, in that particular group of flats, may potentially, to a higher degree, have some level of loneliness issues, or may need some support. We get involved in clubs and stuff like this.
Yeah, I see.
See what I mean? So the reason I mentioned that is because Unite had a mission to look after the well-being of their students. Yeah, they have assumptions about what students want, what students care about. But as an organisation and as a team and as a division, we collected additional data, which helps us make better decisions to ultimately deliver on that mission. See what I'm saying? So you not only do you have the ability to eliminate mistakes by collecting more data, you have the ability to make better decisions and make more benefit, more value by collecting more data. So that's what I believe, and that's what I've always focused on with my staff members and what I've done throughout this particular business and anything I've ever done before.
Yeah, and I think
more data is almost always better.
I think that's massively interesting, and I think that's a really good example that you gave of aligning to that mission, aligning to that outcome, and then using that data to uncover problems that you didn't know existed that can be solved, that all move you further towards that outcome.
Exactly. And I mean they that data, for instance, it wasn't at the time I was there, I don't know about now, they could have advanced on that. It wasn't being consistently and methodically collected, but it was being analysed, right?
Yeah.
We wanted to see if quiet corridors tend to have more issues, and it's just you've always got to be intuitive. You've always got to be thinking about how you can use data to better advance people's lives and your business's bottom line, and you've got to have an intuitive and an inquisitive mindset at all times, not only to work in data, but I think just to do anything startup or scale up related.
Yeah.
Because you'll find information and ideas that you had no idea existed before.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really, really great and certainly valid point. So, yeah, I guess then in terms of Brijj itself, then what are the, you mentioned before, in the startup phase, and you're starting to get, really good, kind of clarity on that value proposition and customer acquisition, and some lessons learned on marketing, but still a very, very solid sounding research driven approach to this. So yeah, what does the future, immediate future look like for Brijj then? What are your kind of key things that you're focusing on at the moment?
So the immediate future is rectifying that strategic area that we made in the beginning on the commercial side. So a laser focus on further refining our marketing commercial messaging.
Yeah.
Trying our best to improve the team's capabilities in that space. Making some very I say quick, so I don't know how would I phrase this? Short time frame decisions on how much we plan to spend on the commercial side.
Yeah.
So that's a funding and spend question. And really, our intention is to go from a very, very small business that's at the that nascent stage to becoming a hyper growth business. And that requires our laser focus on the commercial side. So we're right at the beginning of that journey. Full disclosure, we're right at the beginning of that decision and those decisions and that strategic step. But that's the short-term focus. We need and want to grow as fast as we can. And there's two reasons for that. The first reason is obviously because that's how startups work.
Yeah.
Growth is king, right? We need to do that for me, for my co-founders' benefit, and any future funding that we want to bring in. The second reason is because it correlates with our ultimate vision, and our ultimate vision is to build a platform that can tell you the best decision, action, and outcome that you should take based on any business question. So let me expand on that a little bit. It's our ultimate vision for the product.
Yeah.
every business out there has data analysts. Nearly every single business out there has data analysts, and they have answered hundreds of questions over many, many years. So what that means is that a lot of the time when a business question is asked, it has already been answered. Yep.
Yeah.
It's either been answered directly, or the code is there for it to be answered very quickly. A chart is there to be updated, or a report could inform that particular question.
Yeah.
But I cannot tell you how many businesses out there have no record of what they have previously created. I created a lot of analysis for DMGT and Hobson's PLC back when I was a data analyst. If that question is asked now, I can guarantee you no one has a clue where that report is stored or where that piece of code is executed. Our ultimate aim is to create a system where every question in a business is asked. And so therefore, every requirement, every piece of code, every decision, every action, and every outcome is also recorded. Almost a central point of truth for a business's decision-making process. Now, in order to do that, what do you need? You need data, and lots of it.
Yes.
Yeah. So therefore, in order to build this grand vision for our product, which will have immeasurable value to not just SMEs who we're targeting right now, but enterprises ultimately, we need to accumulate the amount of data we need to build our ML models, to build our predictive models, to actually map out the way that our platform will deliver on that promise. So that's why the commercials is so important, because we need to grow aggressively in order to start building that and to be able to prove it as a proof of concept, which will help us once we've finalized or proven the theory behind what we're trying to build there will be staggeringly valuable. So that's why we're focusing on the commercials and the marketing side right now.
Awesome, and that sounds like a very compelling vision and a very powerful product as a result of that.
Yeah, we hope so. I mean, imagine if a sales director types in a question, and up pops the last 12 pieces of insight or data that organization itself has created.
Yeah.
Very rare is that available in most organizations. I mean, you've worked for some big companies in the past, and you've worked for yourself. I bet you've asked questions of a data analyst and said, why can't you answer this straight away?
Yeah.
Why is it going to take you so long to answer this question? Surely somebody's asked this before. And the data analyst is like, maybe, but that could have been 6 years ago, and I don't know who the guy was.
Yeah, they forget, even if they know to ask for what was done before. People do forget.
Exactly. And it saves a huge amount of time, it will save a huge amount of labour, and it'd be massively valuable. And there are platforms out there that try to do this, or try to do it in different ways. But I think if you create an ecosystem whereby naturally the question is asked in the platform, and naturally the question is answered in the same platform, the natural consequence of that is that all of your questions and answers are in the same place, rather than doing your work in Jira, storing the outputs in SharePoint, asking your questions in Google Forms, chatting about it in Slack, asking another question in email, phoning somebody.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Like you can't create this interlinked network. Well, you can, but most businesses don't have the technical knowledge or the money to do it.
Yeah.
So therefore, I think our platform solves that problem. But we need to get there. And the way that we get there is collecting more data and collecting more customers. So that's the focus right now.
No, that sounds great. And I wish you the best of luck with that process.
Thank
and I'm sure it will be very, research driven, given your background and approaches so far. And I think it's good to see that growth is not, but it's not purely about, attempting to boost customer numbers. There's no vanity metrics in there is what I mean. You're looking for genuine, sustainable growth, and that is growth that's going to obviously, accelerate the business, make the business more valuable, but also it's something that then feeds into a bigger vision and bigger product vision, which I think is really, really good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you said that. I mean, I am like most founders in that I want to make something of myself, both, I want to make an impact, and I want to reap the rewards of that. Financially, whichever way you want to look at it.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I loved being a data analyst, and I have met some of the most intelligent and dedicated professionals of my life doing this work. I've managed them, I've worked with them, I've spoken to them at conferences, and it's a really, really valuable and imperative discipline. And I'm going to be doing this the rest of my life regardless. I'm going to be working in data analytics in one way or another. So I personally want to make an impact on this industry that lasts longer than the 30, 40 years that I plan to work in it. And so that's what I'm ultimately trying to achieve with Brijj. And obviously I want to also create value for my co-founder, I want to create value for any shareholders that we have in the future. And we'll see how it plays out. One way or another, this problem that I'm trying to solve will get solved. It'll either be us. Fingers crossed it will be.
Yeah.
But it's going to get solved one day. And so we're on the journey to doing that ourselves. I wholeheartedly believe that.
Cool. No, I think that's an excellent vision, and I think it's the right way to go about building, a startup, transitioning into that, higher growth scale up. You're doing it for the right reasons and in the right way, which I think is fantastic. And for anyone listening that's interested in finding out more about Brijj, obviously we'll be sharing the links to the website in the notes as well, so people can take a look at the platform, see if it's something they might be able to get on board with and use as well. But before we kind of close out, are there any kind of closing thoughts that you have, or any other bits of information you'd like to get across?
Not really. Other than I hope that it's been useful for you to chat with me, and I hope your listeners find even the smallest bit of information that I provide today useful. Not all data is useful, but I hope some of this data that I've given you will be valuable, and you can use it to either make the decision to start your own business, or to benefit your own in some kind of positive way.
No, absolutely. And no, thank you again for taking the time. And I think there is a lot of data in this conversation that I think, people should take away, like the value of that research, and, trying to break down some of the bias that may exist, and no matter the size or scale of your business, the way you've broken down, problem validation, validating the problem exists, but then secondly is one worth solving. Before you get to validating the solution is the right solution to that problem, and feeding into the marketing, the messaging, it's all related to serving that core audience. I think there's a lot that people should listen to in this conversation about the importance of that research and making decisions based on data. So no, thank you for sharing that, much appreciated. And yeah, I look forward to another conversation and seeing how that growth has gone.
Absolutely. Look forward to it. So thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. I've enjoyed it.
Good. No, me too. I think it's been a really great conversation. So thanks again, and take care. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Inside the Scale Up. Remember, for the show notes and in-depth resources from today's guest, you can find these on the website insidethescaleup.com. You can also leave feedback on today's episode, as well as suggest guests and companies you'd like to hear from. Thank you for listening.